thank you so much. What a powerful day this has really, really been. I've been sitting here completely enthralled, and I thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. This next panel really focuses on finding solutions. After a day like this, we really need to have an opportunity to understand how these things can never happen again and what can happen as a part of this legal system that is still aspiring to be a justice system. And we're going to begin by playing you a video, short in nature, to really orient the conversation here before we bring up our guests, who are Jessica Jackson, a lawyer who helped lead the Reform Alliance, an organization dedicated to ending mass incarceration and supervision. Jessica, I'm so glad you're here. Let me sit down before I have a hot flash. Hold on. New York, I don't know what's going on. I'm from Minnesota. Whew. Also, we have a lawyer, father, basketball coach, and formerly incarcerated activist. His name is David Safavian, and he works on criminal justice reform with conservatives in the so-called red states and as well in Congress. Welcome to the program. I'm glad you're here as well.
I'm glad to be here too.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. I want to show you right now what we're talking about in this video that really is a moment for us to understand just how the work of these two people and so many others, they're very humble, but they have spearheaded a number of efforts. I want you to have a visual picture in your mind of the impact of their work before I even introduce what that work is. Take a listen.
Oh my God, really?
When you see that, you can clap, because I think you know what that was. Did you know it was the reunification of families, of human beings with other human beings, leaving some of the conditions we've spoken about here today? When you both see that, first of all, help people to understand, we're not talking about just the people that we saw. We're talking about more than 60,000, at least 60,000 people who have a similar story like that, who've been impacted, who've come home, who've returned to loved ones, who've returned to society that isn't always kind. I want to begin first by talking to you both. I want them to know who you are, because I think it's important. I know for myself, I'm a natural skeptic, so I want to know who's talking to me before you tell me who you are. Like, I want to know who you are. So tell me a little bit about the fact that both of you have some connective tissue. Both of you have had varying degrees of closeness to our legal system and incarceration in particular. Why don't I start with you, Jessica, as to why this is personal to you?
Well, I'll start by saying that I didn't set out and intend to become a lawyer. In fact, I love kids and thought I'd be a stay-at-home mom, but the universe had a different plan when my first husband was incarcerated while we were married. And it was through that I saw just so many families that looked like mine being torn apart by a system that said it was going to support people and said it was going to make us safer, but in fact was doing the opposite and was traumatizing entire families and communities. And that's really what drove me to get involved and become a lawyer.
And what was your husband incarcerated for?
Well, as you know, there are a lot of problems out there that we just simply incarcerate people for: mental health issues, drug addiction issues. And unfortunately, he developed a drug addiction and ended up being sentenced with 15, served 6. He served 3.5 years.
David, tell me about your personal connection. It's also very personal to you.
Yeah, I was moving along. I was just a government employee. I was working in the White House. And I found myself caught up in a political scandal. And I ended up going through 2 trials and 2 appeals. And one day in July of 2011, I had to sit down with my 7-year-old daughter and explain why I was going to prison. And that was hard enough, and it was incredibly difficult for my family. And when I got there, you know, I checked every box as a Republican and a conservative, right? I was a White House official. I worked as a chief of staff on the Hill, you know, raised as a right winger. And when I got to prison, I saw the waste of human potential. I saw how badly the system works or doesn't work. And I found myself in that mix. You know, they say a tough on crime Democrat is someone who's been mugged, and a criminal justice reformer who's a Republican is someone who's been incarcerated. And I think that's fair. And I saw it firsthand, and seeing families in and out on visitation day just broke my heart. So when I got out, at first I didn't want to do anything related to criminal justice reform. I wanted to move on with my life. Hopefully people would forget and I could do something else. Then I realized it was a calling, that God had given me skills and experience that if I didn't use it to fix the system that I just endured, that there was a plan for me, and I executed on that. And now what I do is I deal with and talk to conservatives primarily about ways in which we can fix the system.
You know, it's fascinating, I think, because no one ever believes that they themselves will be touched by the legal system. Nobody believes that it will be them until it knocks on your door, even with the perceptions and the stereotypes that are imposed. We still have a distancing that we need emotionally to survive in this world. And I, as you know, was a former prosecutor. And I think about the ways in which no one leaves unscathed in the system. No one does. But what's interesting, and why I think it's important to have this conversation with you two in particular, is although there's a connective tissue of both being touched personally with incarceration, they could not be more different politically and their policies. Can I call you diametrically opposed? Is that okay to say so? Not enemies, but just, you know, not friends. You know, they say, I'm in DC, they say if you want a friend in Washington, DC, get a dog. It's true. It's true. But I tell you, you all, by your experiences, had a calling that came together. And you both recognized the need to have a seat at the table, but you had to work together in terms of bridging these gaps. And I think this is a moment for us to examine exactly why that is. And the First Step Act is one of the things you both have in common, which people remember was signed into law by then President Trump. That was not without a great deal of controversy, because the idea of, well, why him? And how can this be? And why would you share and break bread with what seems to be an insincere person with respect to this? Walk us through a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah, so I met David in 2015 when he had just started working at the American Conservative Union, and he was introduced by his boss, Pat Nolan, who had also been incarcerated and had helped us host a bipartisan summit on criminal justice reform. And David and I decided to get breakfast one morning, and I was a little nervous, so I brought a friend.
I'm having eggs with a conservative. Come meet me.
Really
Are you kidding? Okay.
So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go meet him. So we sat down, and I think, we really focused on building a relationship, right? Like, he told me his story, I told him my story. Turned out, we both had daughters about the same age who later went on to go to school together. We both had a lot of the same values. We both cared deeply about our families and about the families that were being ripped apart. And then we started talking about solutions, right? Like, where could we agree? Where could we get the two sides to come together? And we started with women in prison and women's issues. And I remember, us talking, and I said, I don't think women who are pregnant should be shackled in prison. And David said, yeah, me neither.
You mean while delivering, restrained in shackles?
Yeah.
while delivering.
Yeah, and I said I think they should be given basic human dignity, like hygiene items when they need them in prison. And David said, "Me too." And that's really where we started. We started by going around the country passing bills with Topeka Sam, who's here, leading the campaign, and just helping women in prison. And from that, we were able to build a coalition that went on to pass the First Step Act.
When you think about that, I think it's so important when you're talking about that the connective tissue and common thing was the goal. It was, what do you believe in? And it's almost in the world we live in today, a much better version of the Me Too movement. Like, I believe that, me too. I believe that, me too. Dignity for a woman in prison. Dignity for people who are human beings who have violated a law, or allegedly did, and were prosecuted nonetheless. When you think about the goal-oriented solution, why is that so critical in these conversations? It's not as if, and we all know, it's not as if one party can get everything done in Washington, D.C. David, what's your thought?
You know, the times we're in, it feels like the left and the right are so far apart. Pick an issue, read the newspaper, and, we have vast disagreements. Unless you're focused on a goal, the goal, those disagreements can cloud your relationship. And so Jessica and I, others who I work with on the left, others I work with on the right, we may not share our worldviews, but we can all come together and say, you know what? We need a system that makes people safer, that treats people better, that has a smaller footprint, that doesn't destroy families, that doesn't cost $80 billion a year. And as long as we're focused on that goal, I really don't care that Jessica may have different views than I do on environment, marriage, pick a kind of wedge issue. Doesn't matter to me. The only thing that matters to me is that I know Jessica and my other allies have my back, and I have their back when we're focused on finding a solution to the criminal justice problem.
It's and I applaud and echo that sentiment. It's just that for so many people, there's the sort of ideal solution of being able to have a kumbaya and find that common ground. And then there's the reality of the political hurdle that says, it's much easier if you're talking about, and I'm picking on you because you have a white collar on, white collar crime, right? The idea of, that's a dignified criminal. It's not really a criminal. It's a dignified person, as opposed to everyone else we're dismissive of. When you think about the hurdles that are in place, and the reality is that people are tending to only, just as you all, found the vehicle for agreement by first realizing you had something in common. That is a hurdle in and of itself, for people to see themselves in other people who don't look like them, don't vote like them, don't earn like them, and are not criminalized like them. So with all those different facets, how does that lead to still a positive political conclusion?
Yeah, it's not always easy, but I think, there's one meeting that we had on the First Step Act that was at the Problem Solvers Caucus, and sort of embodies how we do our work. We brought a whole group of people with us from Cut 50, and which was my previous organization, and we sat down with a bunch of legislators on the left and on the right. So we started talking about the bill, we started talking about what could be in the bill, and halfway through the meeting, somebody stood up, a former prosecutor stood up and said, we have to draw the line somewhere. We can't let murderers and rapists and people who've committed a violent crime benefit in any way. They should stay there. They should stay there. And
I was not that prosecutor.
Good. And one of our team members, a man named Michael Mendoza, looked at me, and I knew what he was about to do. He stood up and he said, listen, I'm here in a suit, and I look like one of you. I could be any lobbyist on the Hill, but I'm also a 15-year-old boy who killed somebody and ended up serving 10 years or 20 years inside of the system. And everybody just shut down. right then, right? How are you going to argue? Here's this person who you've been talking to, you assumed was just some lawyer up here, some really smart guy, and suddenly you find this out. And it was like a light switch went off as he started to tell his story. So I think the key to getting through many of these hurdles is brave folks like the people who have been up here on the stage today, sharing their stories, sharing the impact it's had on them, sharing, the trauma that they've gone through in the system, and having that courage. And we've always tried to amplify that and elevate their voices and give them the biggest platform possible.
So how do you avoid that getting silenced? I mean, obviously, people make many assumptions about and paint with a very broad stroke liberals, conservatives, progressives, moderates, you name it. Conservatives in particular, not most likely to be voted in the high school yearbook as the most receptive. Just putting it out there. And so if that's the case, how do you, when that amplification's happening, what's going on behind closed doors in those conversations in the so-called red states to persuade?
So the first thing that I would tell you is, particularly for conservatives, particularly for people of faith, that you have to lay it out. We're all created in God's image, and we're all capable of redemption at some degree. And thanks. And, I regularly work with legislators who go to church on Sunday and pray. There's a country music song, I go to church on Sunday and I curse on Monday. They go to Mass, they go to church, and, Monday they're coming out swinging and not understanding the concept of redemption. And, we have to remind them of that. Does that mean that we don't hold people accountable? No. It's a matter of communication at that point, but we have to remind legislators of all stripes that we're talking about human beings here, and that, we have this societal obligation to make sure that they're treated with dignity. And if we can't do that, that really portends a whole bad breakdown of society. We've got a lot of work to do. We've dug ourselves a deep hole, but we're starting to come back a little bit. But boy, these times are tough to be a criminal justice reformer right now. It's incredibly difficult because whether you like Donald Trump or hated Donald Trump, when he signed that First Step Act, he sent a signal to Republicans all up and down the chain. It was okay to be for criminal justice reform. It was okay to support these bills. And with Trump not there, and again, we can have our opinions, we can differ on that. Without Trump there, you are seeing the tough on crime people coming out everywhere at every level and torpedoing every single bill.
It's true, and yet we do have a new Supreme Court justice who was accused of being soft on crime because she honored someone's rights. So there is not the full, evolution of thought, but I hear you 1,000% on this notion. But the First Step Act was criticized because it was a first step. We're talking about the moon landing, one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. That same treatment wasn't given to the first step in the sense of it didn't go far enough. And we know, of course, people are hungry. They are virtually emaciated because their faith can be shaken by inaction. And I wonder, when you have the first steps there, how do you entice and convince people to stay the course for the next step and the next one and the next one, knowing there's a change in administration, a change in priorities, the media's lens shifts? What do you do?
I think you just have to keep going, right? We've got federal legislation coming soon that's going to address some more issues in the federal system. We've continued to work together to pass state bills. I think we've passed 16 bills in 10 states since the First Step Act. And counting. So I think you just have to stay the cause. And, I know that a lot of people said the First Step Act didn't go far enough, but it really is the gift that keeps giving because more and more people are coming home every single day. And I promise that even though it was just a first step, it was a big step for them.
And let me take that on for a second because, one, there was a better bill the year before the First Step Act. It was called the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act. And guess what? We were ready to pass CERCA, and someone said, you know what? We can do better when Hillary Clinton is in office, and we know what happened. And then we got the First Step Act. So the one thing that I would hope everybody in this room takes away with is, one, criminal justice is not a partisan issue. You can have people on both sides of the equation. Two, and you know, I've come to learn this. As a conservative, I really didn't put a whole lot of credence in how we talk about things. But it's important that you have messengers, that have people who can speak conservativese, right? For lack of a better term. Whether you like it or not, 23 states have Republican majorities in their House and Senate. Whether you like it or not, another 21 states have unified control, or 21 states have unified control, governor, House, and Senate. Going in without the right messenger, going in and asking for everything on your wish list and say, we're not going to play if we don't get everything here, is the surest way to get a reaction from conservatives, and they're just going to say, fine, we're not going to do anything. So it's got to be a two-way conversation, and it's got to be a conversation that's genuine, and it's got to be a conversation with people that speak the language of the legislators you're dealing with.
I want to thank you both because it's an important conversation that needs to continue. And whether you're speaking the language of the conservatives, language of liberals, let's all speak the language and fluently of justice. Because we pursue it, what if we actually caught it one day, right? Thank you both so much for being here today and sharing that first step. We have next steps coming up. Our next panel on transitions in and out of the system will begin in just 5 minutes. Thank you.